No, this is fine. Oh, fine.
There you go.
Good evening. This is the November 14th Policy Committee meeting for Council Rock School District. Let's do a quick roll call to my left.
Ed Salaman, School Board.
Matt Federickson, IT Director.
Joe Hidalgo, School Board.
Yota Pali School Board.
Shal Falk, Director of Secondary Education.
Buck Raddick, Council Rock South High School.
Jason Truskevich, Council Rock High School Board.
Tim Long, Newtown Middle School.
Rich Holohan, Holland Middle School.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Mary McKee School Board.
And I'm Mike Thorward, School Board. Mr. Hickey's en route. He had an MBIT meeting. He should be here any minute, and I'm expecting Mr. Roosevelt. We'll see him eventually. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and the team. Just for a little setting the plate here, we have two policies tonight. One's going to garner some discussion. One's some verbiage change. So I asked if, and 218 is the one with just some verbiage change. I asked if we could do that first, just to bang that out. There's nothing significant in there, and these folks will tell you about it. And then we'll move on to the second one. So with that, I don't know. Al, you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Thorward. Okay, 218.1 is our weapons policy, and the weapons is actually governed by Pennsylvania State Law Act 26, which requires the expulsion for at least 1 year of any student who possesses a weapon on school property, at a school function, or to and from school, which seems fairly all-encompassing. However, we actually found out that we needed to expand our authority a little bit just to make sure that we included things like a nexus, a direct connection between the weapon and the school, so whenever that occurs. So what you see under authority, Matt, and I think you're there, number one. Yes. And by the way, this was all reviewed by our solicitors at Eastburn and Gray, and they made some revisions and just making sure that the language was such that we were kind of covered in these areas. So what you see under authority 1 through, I believe it goes to 5, would be the new verbiage, as Dr. Thorward referred to it, that was suggested by Eastburn and Gray, that broadens the authority level for 218.1. So
Al, there were no other, that was really.
that's the full change to 218.1.
So, again, this one, we unfortunately have to exercise on occasion, and here comes Mr. Hickey. So, board questions on this one? Mrs. McKee?
Thank you. I have a question under authority number 1, and it applies to both of the policies in that it references during the time the student's traveling to and from, whether it's district furnished transportation or not. And like all of us, I don't want to see as an act of policy that we can't enforce or properly investigate. That one has me a little concerned. Could you speak to that, please, Mr. Funk?
So, do the best I can. So it's always kind of been this portal-to-portal sense in terms of school authority for students, but you're right. Generally speaking, when we think about portal-to-portal, it's school bus stop,
Yeah.
to when you picked up, and then to when you dropped off. But according to Eastburn and Gray, it really expands to when a student leaves their house if they're in transit to school and when they return to their house, whether that's via school transportation or not. So that's just language from the solicitor.
Okay, appreciate that. And if you don't mind a follow-up, I'm just trying to play out in my mind how that would play out if, for example, a student came and said, Susie drove me to school today and she had, a knife in the glove compartment, or, and as I said, it applies to the other policy as well. If we have a student who comes and reports something, then how is that followed up? What's our responsibility there?
I think that would be under this authority, that it would be portal-to-portal in that case.
So then it would somehow be investigated and...
So what if in that scenario, a student drives their father's car and the father has a knife in the glove compartment because, maybe he wants to defend himself if something happens? Who is responsible in this scenario?
In my mind, the student is about the question. I mean,
Maybe have not even opened the glove
Uh,
box, you didn't know, right?
But
Yeah.
the other thing is, if that knife stayed in the glove compartment, we won't be talking about this.
No, what about Susie saw it?
Okay, fair, but again, if they stayed in the glove compartment out of sight, we wouldn't be talking about
Okay. So it's not that it's there, it's used.
it, or brandished or whatever, you know. I mean, Al, if you want to.
Well, I mean, it's hard to, there's so many scenarios and these things unfold in that. I appreciate the fact that my colleagues from the secondary administration have joined me tonight. So we've all experienced, these circumstances, and they're difficult circumstances, and they all tend to present uniquely. So that makes it hard in and of itself, doesn't it, to have a policy that governs every particular. So, I think ideally, when you're crafting policy, you want to have enough latitude to have a commonsensical approach, but you also need to make sure that you're taking care of what you need to take care of. So that's the balance that you're trying to strike with that. When we're informed of things that violate policy, that puts us in a difficult position, because our job is to enforce the school board policy when it pertains to these very difficult circumstances.
What about a switchblade knife? Comb. So a switchblade comb, they're pretty
Comb.
popular. I've used one on Halloween, and I worry that if my son was to obviously, if he brought that to school, he could be in complete trouble.
I'm gonna just.
So I want to make sure we have certain barriers, and I also don't think if someone's driving their kid to school, that whatever's in that vehicle with the adult driving is an issue to us. I don't think, unless obviously the police are involved. It's a Northampton thing. But then the other thing is, if you have a student driver who drives their car to school and they park it, obviously sometimes there might be something in there that I wouldn't even know the scenario there, how we find out what's in somebody's car unless there's if you get rumors of something in somebody's car, you're going to call Northampton Police. I'm thinking this is nothing that we do. So I'm just kind of confused, or not confused, but I think if someone brings a toy gun to school, I think they're in complete big trouble too. And I just don't know. Back in the day, that wasn't like that. So I don't even know how you would navigate that and suspend somebody for a full year that maybe did something absolutely harmless, but because of the policy, they are completely, their life could be totally altered and changed. So I don't know about you
I
guys.
believe these are governed by state law. Weapons are defined by state law.
Act 26, yeah, and there is
Still
a
something to be
lookalike
talked about.
component of it. I guess subject to interpretation, how lookalike something might be to a weapon. You folks have any?
Well, I think part of what you try to do when dealing with kids is, what's the intent? What was behind the motivation? If the child drives his father's car to school, the father has a knife in the glove box, and it's, word of mouth, and you investigate and find out that actually did happen. We do have a responsibility of reporting it through the policy, but we also will send our conversations to the school board as you make recommendations for expulsion, and saying, look, here's the scenario. Kid was at a Halloween party, he had a switchblade comb with his outfit and didn't realize it was there, and so we send that information to you so that we can make the appropriate case on the behalf of the kid. Oftentimes what we'll do is ask kids, well, who did you show it to? Why did you bring it? Those kinds of questions give rise to, well, what was the motivation? What was the intent? And we've done those in the past. Well, I showed it to the 15 kids on the bus. Well, that's problematic.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to those individual scenarios, I think it requires a decent amount of discussion, investigation, and as much information as we can provide to the school board, making a determination about the extent of enacting the policy, if that makes sense.
And if I may, Joe, this gives these folks, the administration and us, the authority to do what was just said. I mean, to have the discussion, figure out what the appropriate thing is. I mean, I don't see anything cut and dry here. This just expands the scope of authority where we could. because we need to be able to. So, we've experienced it recently where this was needed, Joe. I mean, and if we didn't have this, so, I don't want to personally get drawn into a bunch of what ifs because we will be here all night, what if. I would say we define our scope and the punishments and we let the educators kind of figure out what to do with that. I mean, to the point made, some of these should never come to us if the intent was not, so.
Yeah. And that my question was really more toward, and looking at administrators, I think I see, is it workable for you?
Yeah.
And I'm feeling assured that that's the case.
And this was brought to us, this wasn't, the board didn't, this was brought to us based on, recent experience that we need these changes.
Right.
They need these changes, so I'm here to, help them have the changes that they need, so.
I think he was first.
Yeah, I think the other key, if I could, exceptions to the policy may be made by the superintendent.
Can you scroll down to that map?
And fortunately, or unfortunately, we have Don Mahalik in the audience, who's head of our security and safety.
Where's
So,
towards the bottom?
yeah, I'm sorry, I just went out. Anything that comes to the board
Yeah.
from the superintendent's office, I think would be investigated by Don and his team. And I think based on his background and the reason why he's here, he would set the table to say, this didn't look the way it appeared after investigation. As far as vehicles on property, they become subject to any type of search under school
Right.
district policy. So, this is also has to be a buy-in from our parents that
Right.
this is what we expect when you let somebody use your car. This is what we expect when your kid goes fishing on Friday, that you change backpacks for Monday, and you take out items that don't fit into our policies. Because the last thing we want to do is put a kid out of school for whatever length of time that would be, but it also builds in that the superintendent is designated or whoever, I guess, would set the table for the board. So I like the idea of giving a little bit more, and I like the idea that Eastburn Gray was actively involved in this. So for me, I'm fine with this. I think these policies, and Mr. Tate, you just did them, what, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
These are kind of fluid to some degree, unfortunately. Just takes one case for it to change a little bit, so I'm okay with this. And then look, if Val and your folks, the team, you needed to come back to the board, bring it back to the board, we can do adjustments, absolutely.
So I think
Yeah.
if there is this kind of flexibility, it makes sense. If, the administration board has the room left to, work out the specifics on the case. I was just concerned because when I first joined the board, I was on one of these disciplinary hearings, and I heard that, for the first offense was 45 days set, so there was no flexibility, no matter what happened. So, and I know it's under discussion today, so if it's not so much set in stone and there is flexibility, I would appreciate that more. And definitely, we should not give any room to allow people, bring any kind of weapons to school in like their own car or like in the school bus. But I appreciate the flexibility that the superintendent and the administration has to work on each case accordingly.
And then, just to follow, by the time we get them, if the board sees them, the administration already has a recommendation for us. That's not, we don't typically deviate from, the administrative recommendations.
They're a proposal.
Yeah, so, so the educators have had it.
Right.
I don't want to be the enforcement arm for this, I just adjudicate when required, so. Yeah.
I was going to say, to the point that Mr. Funk made at the outset, this was recommended by Eastburn and Gray, and to the point that Mr. Solomon brought up, there's the discretionary, the discretion of the superintendent makes this totally acceptable to me.
So I'm seeing nods. Is there anybody here that doesn't agree to this? Okay. So I would propose, are you ready for, maybe not Thursday, maybe December meeting? We'll just put it on for a vote. Anybody have a problem with that one?
No.
Okay, and that one,
I just want to ask again.
yeah, go ahead.
I would only ask a question, changing this mid-school year, have we, if you can say, have we put this policy out there that this may change? I just want to be consistent now.
So my recommendation, and I'll also, if you folks want to chime in, would be have this implemented at the beginning of next academic year.
That makes
Just
sense.
so we don't have that level of confusion, changing things midstream. I'd also like to get it in the student handbook, the student agendas.
So should we put it on the agenda for July?
Probably better, gives us time to work on
I
it.
mean, I think January is even fine, gives us enough time to do what
We
we
can
need
always
to do.
So the problem is once we approve it, then it's the active policy.
But
I don't think so.
Can-
I think we can approve it on a date in the future. We'll talk to East Spring and Gray. Now, a board could disapprove it in between then, but let's talk to East Spring and Gray.
I'll
like his
I'll
idea.
talk to Aaron.
Yeah.
We can have actually, the software will allow us to have two policies on there at the same time. We can have one that expires
Yeah,
June 30th and then one that's active July 1st.
Thanks. Yeah, I think if you waited, it would be the cleanest way to go. It gives us more time to think too. My question is, because I'm not familiar with what you guys are saying, how is this going to help you if you can say it in a way that won't, hinder any type of process in the
I'm going to
future?
call for an exec session if we do that.
Nothing? Okay.
I'm going to call for an exec session. because
Okay,
there's a reason
call
for
an
it.
exec session.
All right, we're going to adjourn for 10 minutes for an exec session.
Can you go next door?
Yeah, we'll go next door.
All right.
Now, what do we do?
I'll stay here.
Rich, you stay here.
You're
You're not
No,
gonna-
not this.
Sir, I'm protesting.
Okay. I just want to let everyone know we're still broadcasting, so.
Tonight was up.
227?
227 is next, yep.
Yeah. Well.
Thank
Some
you
days
for
you
that.
eat bear and some days.
So we're back. We're going to move on to policy 227.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Thorne. All right, 227 may probably bring out a little more conversation, and that's fine. This is something that I think secondary administrators have really grappled with over the last several years. I myself have kind of evolved in my thinking about this, and I don't think there is a right or wrong answer per se. It's difficult, right? Anytime you have these events with a student, and they're pretty traumatic. They're traumatic for the student, and pretty traumatic for the family. And, it's one of those cases where, it's easy to kind of say, zero tolerance policies until you're impacted by it personally, and then it becomes a little bit more personalized. But we do, we kind of have some critical mass amongst the secondary administrators that we are drifting towards a possible recommendation to the board for a change in policy 227, where the first offense would be 10 days. The second offense would still be 1 year. We are interested in some caveats to this approach, however, and I'll provide you with some rationale, kind of why we collectively got where we got, and then also, open it up for any questions that you may have of the middle school and high school principals. So firstly, I would say, looking at the county and the 13 high schools, we seem to be an outlier in terms of first offense 45 days. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, that's just kind of where we are. Most of the other high schools are in the 3 to 10 day out of school suspension for a controlled substance, drug, and alcohol infraction. That doesn't minimize the infraction. I mean, our primary purpose is the care, welfare, safety, and security of our students. This is a serious act. This is an unlawful act if a student were to bring a controlled substance in or even distribute. That is why any infraction is immediately referred to our school resource officer, whether that's Northampton Township Police or Newtown Township Police. So this is an unlawful matter as well. The consequence, what ends up happening is there's also an immediate referral to our student assistance program, which is commonly referred to as CARES, Children at Risk in the Educational System is the acronym. So you have that referral, you have the police referral, and then you have an informal hearing. Informal hearing within 3 days is the opportunity for the students and parents to kind of present their side of the story about what unfolded. If there was a case of mistaken identity, it's an opportunity for due process at the building level. And the building administrator enforces the policy of the school board, you referred to earlier, and then makes a recommendation. And the parents at that time can either be accepting of the recommendation of the building level administrator, or they can say, you know what, I'd like to kind of continue to contest this, if you will. I will request a formal hearing of the board. That's when you have at least 3 board members. And now it is more of a formalized process. You bring in a court stenographer, there's opportunities for attorneys to present evidence, and then witness counters and things of that nature. And then ultimately the board renders a decision. I think one of the reasons why collectively the secondary administration is taking a hard look at this is that more and more when we are attending the informal hearings, and I'll just speak personally, 15 years as principal, last few years, oftentimes those informal hearings, the emphasis becomes about the consequence. Like the focus is so much on the penalty, and it's a little disheartening as an educator in that you want to kind of talk about the behavior, and like, wait a second, because that's our job, right? And we're dealing with kids. We're dealing with kids. So I guess as educators, maybe we do have that, empathetic side, and, they put erasers on pencils for a reason, and, we're going to give you another opportunity. And we're balancing that out, however, with, well, we're also responsible for the care, welfare, safety, and security of the entire campus. So that's why I think it's kind of a struggle for us. But I have noted that because the consequence is deemed to be by the families or the students who are kind of on the receiving end of it, draconian, that it loses the focus on the actual behavior and that opportunity to address the behavior. So, and I've seen that kind of, is that an evolution or is that a de-evolution, as we have kind of through the years. Whether or not this is a factor or not, I don't know. We've also seen society kind of take a different look in terms of medical marijuana, things of that nature. I don't know if that plays into this or not. I don't think it does, but, THC and vaping is something that, is a problem, and it's something that we need to address. And we do address it, and we take it very seriously. We refer it to the police, and we make sure that CARES and Student Assistance Program is involved. And the administrators, secondary administrators, were also, very convicted in their thinking that if we were to go to a 10-day for a first offense, that there must be some sort of educational component for the offender to complete, whatever that program is. We used to have tobacco cessation programs for kids who were caught smoking cigarettes. Something similar, and they exist, whether that's online, and you have to complete this program at your cost, and then there's a certificate, and then you need to produce that certificate to come back and restore yourself to the school community in good standing. So that's kind of just some of the surrounding things around the discussion that has taken place, at least at the secondary principals level, for policy 227, controlled substances. Anything that my colleagues would like to add, or we can take questions?
I guess I'll start. As you said, it's how everything affects you personally. My son was a part of this program, and he was a kid, this particular son, just go to one of them for now. This particular kid, he was, for 12 years, he had nothing, no detention, no anything, no interaction with discipline at all. Made a stupid mistake, realized his mistake, was wrong, deserved to be punished. However, that 45 days probably did more harm for that kid than anything. And I guess you want to say you can focus on the punishment. He knew he was supposed to get punished. He actually kept a diary of how his days went every day. And unfortunately for him, when he came home from this, after school program, his mother was there at least for him to talk to him, get him through the day or whatever. But a lot of these kids, they're home all day by themselves, and then they get picked up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon by a bus on a corner, and then they go, back then it was at LSAC, and then he came home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and now they're going home to an empty house, just thinking about how they screwed up. And like I said, I'm just talking personally. This was a one-off, something's, shouldn't have done it. 45 days was horrible from, like I said, from that standpoint. From an educational standpoint, they said your teachers would have work for you and they would hand it in and they would do all this stuff. And no offense to the teachers, they're concentrating on the 23 kids in their classroom who didn't screw up. But he basically got no work. So educationally for 45 days, it was a waste. I'm a big proponent of the lesser day, whether it's 10, I'm okay with that. I agree with the fact that if you do it a second time, you're out. I don't know if there's a way, and there's probably no distinction among you, of a drug offense and an alcohol offense. I'm sure they're both looked at in the same vein, although if you're 21 years old, you're allowed to have alcohol. If you're 21 years old, you're still not allowed to have drugs, illegal ones. So like I said, I'm kind of happy to see this. I don't know whether it needs to be tweaked or, whatever. The only other question I had about this was, I think in the same vein, I was reading something about more or less to and from events. Like, so for example, I'll just use an example. And I don't know how you would deal with this. You know, me and my buddies, we're going to a football game on a Friday night. And get pulled over by the police, and the kids in the school, the students in the car, hopefully not the driver, have been drinking or whatever, you know. Now, they're not at the game, they're going to, I guess I could say, well, no, I'm just driving around the block, but they're going to be subject to this discipline even going to and or from, as opposed to being on site, much like a car that's on campus. If you're on campus, even if it's another school's campus, it's still campus. I'm just talking strictly about that time in between. But that's something, you know, you said, I'd be happy with the 10-day, you know, with the 10-day at least for the alcohol, and this is something personally that I'm glad to see happening. So hopefully there's another kid in school who, when this happens to, he's not like my son.
I appreciate that. So the wording that you spoke of was taken the same from the 218.1 and transferred over. So if there are some questions about that clause or even what you're speaking to, that's something that we could ask Eastburn and Gray to take another look at, that's for sure. But in terms of what you spoke about the first time around, in terms of the Twilight program and what we have to offer, I mean, we're proud of the Twilight program. You know, we have a content area specialist that shows up each day. It's Monday through Thursday. Each day is a different content area. They do great work trying to facilitate from the school. However, just as you described, you can't replicate the classroom experience. If a student has labs, if they have more specialized classes, it's very difficult to replicate that for a marking period for 45 days. Now, again, there's been that evolution of the policy as well. Years ago, it was 45 school days, and then it migrated to 45 calendar days. But we have seen, and I will say, occasionally, we see students who, because the work is very independent oriented, who have done okay, But the fact of the matter is, we can't replicate labs and specific classes and school experience in a couple hours.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would love to see an in-school suspension as opposed to an out-of-school suspension, but I just see, unfortunately, the cost of that is probably prohibitive. So to minimize the damage, you know, like you said, you're trying to educate kids. For 45 days, all he thought about was his punishment in hell, you know. I mean, and in addition to that, he was a senior, so he lost everything that transpired in that 45 days as well. You know, I guess it all depends on what time of year you get caught.
Other questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I always want to be supportive of policy that administrators say, this is what we need, this is what will work for us. So I hope that this policy will do that for you. We need to give you the tools to do your jobs. And assuming that this is coming with a majority of administration saying, yeah, we're agreeable to a more stepped policy of out of school time, I really welcome that. I think it really would benefit our kids and give them that second chance that they so often need at such a young age. So assuming that all of you are supportive and you find this workable, then I would definitely support this.
Yeah, obviously, we're not condoning the behavior piece. But first and foremost, we're interested in the academic piece. And we've discussed over the last couple of years, I mean, there's a component we haven't talked about yet, and that's MBIT. I think what I've been wavering, I think what tipped me was specifically 2 years ago, just before we got into all these disruptions. One of my grade level students and an MBIT student who happened to be from Central Bucks were caught in a bathroom with a vape that tested positive, right? So the Central Bucks student was out for 10 days and mine's out for 45. And that kind of tipped me, you know, my kid, and again, not condoning behavior, he needs to be punished. But basically, MBIT was in jeopardy. and the CB student did 10 days and came back, right? So, I mean, we're looking at it really from our perspective of the academic piece and how can we salvage it. And then we like the idea of having some type of program that they have to complete before they get back in. Second time, as you said, second offense, that's different. All bets are off at that point, right?
Again, we love working with the students, and that's the way in which we can educate them, is having with the building working with us. A 45-day, grade level administrator periodically check in with these individuals, but what education is happening other than necessarily their work with the CARES team? And even at that point, it's a little sporadic. They're in the building, they're working with the counselor, they're working with the CARES team, they're working with the grade level administrator, they're working with the teachers every single day. It really is building them back up in a shorter period of time to make sure again, it doesn't happen again. They don't fall too far behind.
And I think the other piece, if I might add just real quick, what Mr. Funkin said earlier, I think that will give us more of an opportunity to have a collaborative relationship with the parent and the family, as opposed to what we experience now, as he mentioned earlier, which many of you have experienced as well when it gets to the formal, right? So I think that will help us in that regard too.
That's a good point.
So I definitely agree with less than 45 days as a first offense. So I was wondering if we need a more tiered kind of approach, because when I look at the definitions, like we have number 1, controlled substances prohibited by federal and state laws, and number 8, you have prescription, non-prescription drugs. I mean, someone would get, well, in trouble for having like what, Advil at school, if he was not in the form, and then if he or she brings the Advil again, they can be expelled for like a whole year. And also, as you said, Bob, maybe cocaine is not really the same as alcohol, and I don't know what is the right way to do that, but I don't think all offenses are equally bad or severe. And also, what about the age? What if someone is in like elementary school and get in trouble, and someone at that age, I mean, you cannot hold them accountable the same way as a senior in high school. So how do we account for that? I'm sure you had cases like that before. I would like to see more tiered section in the punishment. And absolutely, they have to go to the care program, or they need to do whatever offense they have. That's the biggest part, so they know how bad it is and they don't have to repeat it. So I think this is a great first step, but I wish we could work on like additional steps.
I will just comment and roll over something. I know more people who have died because of alcohol than drugs. So, I mean, you don't think alcohol is a big a deal. I beg to differ. You get a teenager behind the wheel of a car with alcohol, it's deadly.
No, I'm not saying they should drink alcohol, of course not, but like the way he was, like Bob was describing, what if like you're on the way to a game, and I'm not saying they should not be punished. I just don't know if it's the same punishment as someone that brings drugs to sell at school.
Well, they're
Like
not-
immediately,
they're covered. They're
kill
different.
people.
They're different. Selling is different on here. You can see it on the document. If you bring drugs to school, the punishment is different. The
So
sell.
we're only talking about individual, like small dosages that someone takes
I don't
themselves.
know what it's small, but yes, we're not.
Under the influence.
Yeah, I mean, it must be like some kind of like law definition of what is for private use versus, because I think over a certain amount is considered not for private use.
I don't think a school district has to go to that level of detail.
I mean, if we have to punish them, we should know what we're punishing them.
Our solicitor did speak to that a little bit in the draft, personal use versus, like, if you brought in large quantities of a controlled substance, and I get, you get heroin, beer, vodka, but all those things are illegal for under. Now, obviously, if someone had an aspirin, that's different. Our medication policy is different. Violation of medication policy, there's 10 day. Yeah, that is already a lesser. That is already a lesser. Now, if you brought in a controlled prescription that was somebody else's prescription, and then, that's a different story. That's what that speaks to. There's a separate medication policy that's less, and that's the 10-day and under. This would be, we've had, unfortunately, you may have students who would take someone else's controlled substance prescription, crush up Adderall, and do things that they shouldn't be doing with it. That's what that's speaking to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we do differentiate.
Because it says over the counter, that's where I was like, over the counter?
Now, that's governed by a medication policy, and that's separate, and that's a lesser offense. But some of those other, like, we've all had junior proms, senior proms, dances at the middle school level. Did the student ingest 2 beers prior to coming, or did they ingest a bottle of vodka? It doesn't matter under the policy. You're under the influence.
What about the age of the student? What is your experience with that?
Well, we're not elementary, but unfortunately, I don't think we've had many elementary cases. I think, there was an example that comes to mind of something that kind of comes close this year, but wasn't. So we haven't had that to the extent that we have at the secondary level. So, and that's fortunate. I think that would be a consideration.
Or
The age would be.
should we talk to the elementary school principals, or so that they have more experience? Or maybe Dr. Sanko would know, since he's been in this. I do believe that they have to be punished, but the right way, and definitely rehab. Definitely give them the tools so they don't repeat it. It's very important not make them like 45 days at home doing nothing. So the punishment has to be the right punishment. And you can, suggest what you think would be fair.
So, like I said, it's always a student assistance program or CARES referral. So our CARES coordinator in the schools, we contract out with the Council of Southeastern Pennsylvania, which used to be Bucks County Drug and Alcohol Dependence Council. It's now the Southeastern Pennsylvania Council. They meet with the student and the family. They have a whole assessment piece that they do. If the family signs a waiver that we can have the results of that, then we're privy to those results, although the family may decide that the school is kept out of it at that point. So in other words, the council would make recommendations, could be depending on usage and things of that nature as to next steps for that individual and family.
So what if there is a case that someone, unfortunately, is in a bad situation and somehow gives themselves in to the school instead of somebody referring? So say I realized that I was coming home from a party, and I had a drunk, right? And then I realized that this was not appropriate. So I go myself to the supervisor in the situation and say, I made a mistake. And do I have the same penalty as someone who?
So if you're referring to like a self-referral component for
Yes.
CARES, we have that for student assistance, and they would not be subject to a penalty for saying that, hey, I'm struggling with a substance, with alcohol. They come forward to a counselor or a student's assistance program, as long as they're not under the influence at that time.
Right.
And say, I need help, then there is no consequence.
So
we
you accept you
provide the
made a
resources.
mistake, but you
Absolutely.
get help.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
Oh,
good.
yeah.
Mr. Tate.
Thank you. Well, I feel really strongly about this one. And we've had a lot of great conversations leading up to this meeting. I appreciate the effort that the administration has made to benchmark us against other districts, because that's helpful to know. I really appreciate all your perspectives and taking the time to be here. The first time I did a disciplinary hearing for 227, I remember being stunned at the predicament that we were in. And it was difficult, tense, and I left with a very bitter taste in my mouth. The second time I did a 227 hearing, it was nearly as bad. And I've been talking to people ever since the first one about, does this make sense? And then Marianne and I had an interesting experience, and there was, I think, one other board member in the room. We met here privately, and Robert was here, Dr. Fraser. And two students who had just graduated took the time to request a meeting with the board, and three of us met with them. And they were eloquent. They were absolutely eloquent and calm, and I don't think they were angry or bitter.
No.
Marianne taught the young men, right?
Yep. Yeah.
The young lady, full disclosure, I coached her older sister in soccer and knew the family, and I think the world of the family. And both these kids really screwed up, and both these kids got 45 days. And what they came to tell us was that 45 days is a bad idea. It doesn't help. We all know there's 100 times as many kids out there dabbling in drugs and alcohol. And I don't say dabbling dismissively. I say that, that's the reality of it. Some kids dabble in drugs and alcohol. Other kids really abuse. We all know that. But their point was, look, the kids who get caught and get 45 days are the dumb ones. Or they make a silly mistake, or whatever happens. And we're harshly punishing kids when it's just a small number, and it's not doing anything to really address the problem. I'm wondering if, a couple of points. Let me ask a couple of questions first. Do we have any evidence that our 45 days means that we're able to deter more kids than other school districts? Mr. Funk?
So we've looked at the PIMS data in the county, and PIMS is self-reporting by school district and by school. So sometimes the way things get coded and labeled, I think the information is fairly reliable, but it's not perfectly reliable. So when we look at like comparable sized high schools in a county, it's about the same infraction-wise. And so there are some years where, the principals around the table will tell you, if you had a particular junior prom, senior prom dance, and all of a sudden there was some sort of pre-party, you may have a little bit of an uptick in your overall reporting. They're not huge numbers that we report every year. 15, 16, and it varies. But that's in line with the similar schools that we have population-wise. Obviously, the larger the school, you tend to have more infractions. I would say, without naming names, there might be a couple schools in the county that tend to have a little bit higher, but generally speaking, I would say we're in line with the other schools.
Thank you. Yeah, I really don't think it works, number one. I don't think the 45 days means that we don't have a drug and alcohol problem in Council Rock, just like there exists in every school district in America for the most part. It's a challenge, but I don't think 45 days is working. I don't think we should reduce to 3 days for first offense. I think that's a slap on the wrist. But I think 10 days seems to me to be a good compromise. And I like the idea of ensuring that there's an educational component. One of the first things I asked about as we were getting around to reviewing this policy was, do all kids get referred? And the answer was, as you said, Mr. Funk, yes, all kids get referred to CARES, because for many kids it could be a symptom. And this kid needs attention. And to Mr. Triskavich's point, and I think Mr. Raddick echoed this, when a kid's not in school, the kid's not getting contact with people who can help that kid get on the right path. So that's another reason why I think 5 days is a bad idea. It really poisons our relationship, I think. I mean, the families that we saw, I only did 2 hearings, but the families that we saw in those hearings, they'll never feel the same way about Council Rock, nor will those kids, nor the 2 kids that came and spoke to Mary Ann and I and the other board member, Dr. Fraser. That's poisoning relationships. I think that's very destructive. I think it's very harmful, and it's not the way we ought to treat kids. So I'm not, and of course, one last thing, as Mary Ann said, it's our responsibility as a board to listen to what administrators and teachers say they think makes sense, what they say they need, and this is a case where I'm 100% pleased that you all think we ought to revisit the 45-day, because I think it's wrong, it's harmful, and it doesn't work. So, thanks for listening.
Mr. Roosevelt.
Thank you. Could somebody pass me a water? Thank you very much.
Looks like it's, yeah, no.
So I'm happy that we're revisiting this policy. I think since I came on the board, this has been a topic in the wings that has required a lot of consideration. And I found myself not making a decision either way. I really wanted to stay open and hear colleagues, hear from principals, hear from educators, administration. And I don't know if I've heard everything in order to make a decision, but I'm pretty close on a couple areas. I do have some questions, because as I read this policy, I think the policy, the intent, and we found this recently with another policy, the intent is there, but there's some areas I think where there's some room for improvement. Particularly with this, since we're talking about 227. I don't see in here some categories, and Mrs. Pally and I think Mr. Tate were touching on this, of degrees. It's all a problem. I don't believe that I have a distinction between which is worse, cocaine or alcohol. I think they're both problems, they're both symptoms, especially at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. So, but in here, there isn't, we all, I think, have a threshold of believability and interpretation. So, for example, if an elementary kid comes into school and happens to have a bag of white substance in his or her pocket and brings it up to the teacher to say, look what I found, what is this, what should I do with it? Most of us probably sitting around this table recognize that she didn't put that in her pocket, or he didn't put that in his pocket intentionally, that it's an accident, and that this kid shouldn't be punished, to be sent away for 45 days. So at some point, though, that believability in that threshold goes away. Does that happen at the high end of elementary school? Does it happen in middle school? Does it happen at the low end of high school? At what point do we stop believing a kid who says, that isn't mine? And I think that might be something that I don't know, that I think I want to pose rhetorically for everybody to consider, not necessarily go around the table and answer. But as we look at revising policies, that seems to be an important thing. It makes me wonder if we add some additional paragraphs, add some tools for an administrator, because I think the first time offense of, let's say, a high school student who brings in a controlled substance, whatever it may be, and is caught with it accidentally in their possession. Maybe it's in their locker, their book bag, maybe it's on their person, maybe they're doing it in the bathroom. That's a lot different from, let's say, somebody doing it right down the hallway. or in the middle of classroom, right? That level of intent, I'm not saying people have done that, I'm just saying that you get to different levels, I think, of violation. Similarly, the person that's bringing something in to sell is problematic.
That's different.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad that we define that as something different. But it makes me wonder, do we add something in that gives more tools to say, we agree, the elementary student didn't bring it in, was not trying to sell it, we can all agree with that. But where is that line? How do we figure out where that line is on somebody being found in their possession with something? Does it happen in middle school? Does it happen in high school? Is it based upon our level of understanding of the kid? You look like someone who might be doing this. You look like someone who might not be doing this. Does grades come into it? Does extracurricular, like whether they participate in a band or something, right? So there's a lot of these factors that maybe should or maybe shouldn't be involved. But I'm asking, I guess, to start out, where does that line stop? Where does that line of believability, this isn't mine, start? The elementary kid, we agree. But where do we go from
Well, I
there?
think in the example that you posed, the elementary student brought the substance to the teacher's attention. I think at the secondary level, if the student brought the substance to someone's attention, I think it would be treated in a similar fashion. I guess where we differ a little bit in terms of possession, when you start talking about book bags and things on your person and wallets, I think the law is pretty clear on that too, and I would say, as a school administrator, I would say, no, that's your possession. Might there be a situation where something was planted on somebody? Okay, I mean, we're not Columbo here, but that's the point of the informal hearing and due process for folks to be able to try to explain that. But by and large, something on your possession, well, I think that would fit. And in this case, we would be looking at, a possible 10-day out-of-school suspension for that, which I think would be appropriate. Variables happen, extenuating circumstances happen. We talked a little bit earlier about maybe giving administrators some of the ability to be able to put things in context. I think that's important. But it's so hard when you start talking about gradations and differentiating and account for this substance and this substance. That's very difficult. You're responsible for making policy. And then it becomes very difficult on our end to enforce or not enforce. So some level, and I know that's frustrating, I guess some level of broadening or keeping it, generalized, I think is helpful.
Right. So then if a high schooler would bring something and say, this isn't mine, I found this, that sounds like that's where a lot of administrators are saying, that's pretty good, right? Maybe, yeah, this person didn't bring it in, right?
I think we would be thankful.
Yeah. Should that be something that we articulate, or should that be kind of that, I don't know, we're live here, that hidden element?
I think in that case, it would be disciplined.
Right. Okay.
And I'll say this tongue in cheek, I don't know how many vape violations we've had this year at South or the high school level, but I don't think anybody owns a vape.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. They don't have.
Not mine.
Not mine.
So,
yeah.
And everybody in prison is innocent too, so probably in the same category, right?
It is, yeah.
What about a family that drug tested their kid and offered that as evidence of it's not mine? Does that fall into the same sort of category of I found this? Especially if it's in their, that's where.
We've had that, particularly that.
Yeah.
We obviously can't require family to produce a test, but
Sure.
we have had people off. We're going to take them right now to St. Mary's and get tested. Can we bring the results back? Sure.
Right, right. And then how does that play?
That may not change the possession,
Sure.
right? That may not change the possession,
Right.
but it factors into our investigation.
And I think that that's kind of where I'm at, is I want to see if, as a board, we can have policy that gives you as the administrators enough tools to ratchet things up appropriately or ratchet things down appropriately as you find in the circumstances of each individual case. But I also don't want to make it so heavily laden that it's too confusing. It needs to be pretty clear cut, right?
I just want to, I'm sorry, Fran, you missed the first part of the meeting.
I'm sorry.
The administration wrote this policy.
Okay.
I did not write it.
No, I
This is what they asked for from us.
The other part of it that they mentioned, that when they conduct their hearings at the school level, like, you know, my kid got busted for an alcohol violation.
Yeah.
Before it goes anywhere, it goes to grade level principal and all that, and they talk about like what happened. Parents are invited to this meeting and they get to talk about like, look, it's not mine, it's, you know, hey, that, you know, sorry, man, I left a case of beer in the car, you know, hey, look, that's my beer, you know, whatever. And then if like, say you tested the kid and he doesn't have anything in the system and the dad says, all right, it's mine, then maybe that gets weighed into before it would even get kicked to another level.
Yeah.
Like, so that part of it, like you said, I do like. The thing that I, just, not to interrupt, but a quick question. I always thought there was another part of this, not just punishment, that there was like a cause and effect. Like I said, I know from personal, my son had to take like, it was like a 100-question-questionnaire, and I think you referenced the old place, not that no one,
Yes.
you know, and then it went
It's up there, Bob. And any program mandated by the administration.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that it was, like, as opposed to
So,
having
and I
added.
think, you know, we talk about it like the iceberg, right? You know, when you have an infraction like this, it's, okay, what's above sea level? You know, and sometimes it's only a little bit, but yet underneath, you got a lot of stuff going on. And that's the worst case scenario for a student when like something happens at the school and then you find out, wow, there's actually a lot going on for this particular student. And that's when you really got to get the Council of Southeastern Pennsylvania, you got to get their help. And they specialize in that. So then they provide the drug and alcohol addiction specialists these assessments that are pretty involved, whether 100 questions, whatever the questions are, and then they get a sense. In that case, you're going to get a sense of how severe the usage is, the frequency, what type of drugs might be that the student is exposed to. And then from there, they make recommendations. The recommendations could range from, you need weekly counseling to you need intensive inpatient services, you need outpatient services. At that point, though, that's kind of the family, and unless they sign waivers that they allow the school, and oftentimes they do, so the counselors just get a sense of what the treatment plan is and what things are going to look like. But that's how that works.
Yeah.
So.
But thank you so much.
John Morris New.
Tell John I'll call him.
All right, I'll tell John.
Now, seriously, I think it's been 3 or 4 years since I almost got on the board that I publicly sat here and said that 45 days was too much. And I got word from some of the board members and even the administration, might have been you, I don't know, but at the time that said 45 days was good, that it was a good deterrent, and it was working. So I'm tickled that we're doing this, but let me keep going, because it's kind of funny when you say 10 days. Now I'm thinking, is this, and again, I was putting it all together, thinking all different kinds of violations, but when you think about just focusing on the substance possession, I definitely think 45 days is too much. This 10 days is, I don't know if I was going all the way down to 10 days. I still don't mind being a very strict school district that does give the students some time to think about what they've done. 45 days obviously did more harm than any good that I think we've seen in the past. So I'm not 100% today going to tell you that 10 days is the right number. I think we could pull some arbitrary numbers and come up with something. Also, I think if you brought in an aspirin, you're going to get a 3-day suspension. You know, I'm sorry, but there's got to be something along the lines where it's different than controlled substances and over-the-counter substances does not have to be put together the same way. And that's another thing, I'm thinking 45 days for bringing, you got a headache and you're not going, you just don't feel like going through the process, or the parent doesn't feel like going through the process. I mean, there's something to be said with that. So maybe that's where the degrees comes into effect here. And also, I'm thinking that the degrees also gives the person under scrutiny or the defendant something to move to. It's either good or bad, you know, like, well, maybe a lesser charge, you know, or a lesser, you know, so that could be a bargaining chip. It might be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. But I'm just happy that, I don't know why it takes 4 years for this to happen, you know, but I'm just thankful, and maybe it's a change in administration for all I know. That's the only thing that's changed. I'm thankful for it. There's still going to be penalties for 45 days for other things. Violence. What about suspensions for is this the only thing we're suspending kids for 45 days for? Or what about fighting and that thing, violence?
So, 10, typically 10.
Oh my God, so we're at 10 for not breaking someone's jaw, and we're 45 days for possession, okay.
You could be expelled too for it's egregious enough. And I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Hidalgo, even about, and I discussed the evolution of my thinking personally on this. Before, I think I would, 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, no, it is a deterrent, stay with it, it works, our numbers are low. And I think my thinking has changed a bit, which happens, you know. I think, you know, as a whole, the secondary administration's thinking has changed a little bit on this as well. Again, there's no right or wrong. At a certain level, you're right, it is arbitrary. Should it be 16 days, should it be 17 days, should it be 18 days? You weigh in all the nuances and context. It's very difficult to say what a set day is. The reason why I think there is a differential between the 45 and the 10, I believe, is that a 10-day out-of-school suspension is really the limit of a school administrator's authority, if you will. When you go beyond a 10-day suspension, now you're talking about something at the board level or the superintendent level. So even at the informal hearing that takes place, when the recommendation from the school administrator is for, it used to be a 45-day exclusion, that is a recommendation that comes up here to be codified, because that's not something that the building level administrator has within their authority. So that's why I think you kind of have that period of, 10 days or 45 days.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's perfect. So actually, if we get rid of the 45 days, that means there's no more board hearings if it stays at 10? Or can they still appeal to the board for a 10-day suspension?
Typically,
No.
no. We can suspend for up to 10 days. Technically, on day 11, it becomes an exclusion, which is where
When we goes to that. So, I mean, what about the different tiers of substances? I think you guys already talked about it.
I'm not seeing an appetite for it, Joe, and as soon as you make it gray.
I didn't say I wanted, I'm asking if there is a difference. Does the law, no, I'm sorry, does the law actually distinguish between certain levels of drugs? Not school policy.
I don't know that. I don't know if, Don, you have any insight in that with quantity.
I'm not going to brain drag you into it, but I thought there was like certain level
But I do want to make.
certain amounts makes it different, certain types are treated different than others. I'm not saying to, as I said, I think at this point, I'm not sure that 10 days, it does take the board right out of it. So maybe that is the clean solution. I'm just happy that you guys came around to something.
Look, and here's another thing regarding the 10 days. I know it takes the board out, but also, I think we would all agree, as we discussed, academically, what we talked about earlier, a student can recover from 10 days, right? They're working on Canvas at the secondary level, so forth and so on, even if they missed that science lab that I was talking about, start extending past that, and MBIT as we were discussing. That's where it can become problematic for a student to get back into the fold, so to speak. So we think 10 works with that as well.
The opportunity even coming after school clinic, see their teacher of record as well.
Well, I think you guys came up with this, makes a lot of sense. If it's taking the board out of a lot of these situations by doing 10 versus anything above 10, and then second, it's still going to come to the board for a year. Maybe that's a range. We can say a year, but they might get 45, they might get anything based on, I don't know, how we were. I know with taxes, we don't make zero exceptions, so I don't know how it works with everything else, with delinquencies, I mean. But thank you. I think I've sold myself on the 10-day.
Mr. Salomon, would you like to
Joe talks long enough, he sells himself, it's good stuff. So I'm struggling here, and you know, Mr. Tate and Mrs. McKay and I have sat on multiple hearings where, you know, it almost becomes an NFL with the ball across the line type of thing. And you leave here concerned because we're talking about kids and their education. I do think it's not safe to say 45 days doesn't work. I would argue that 45 days is a heck of a deterrent when you compare what we do to our neighbors. And you use the example of the Central Bucks kid, they got 10 days, our kid got 45 days. So my question would be, and you probably don't have the answer, how much recidivism rate do we see with a kid that gets 45 days during the course of their middle and high school years? It's not lost on me, this is an educational situation, it's not a jail we're running. So, you know, that to me, that's a question that I don't know if you have the answer to. I mean, other school districts do what they do.
I don't have specifics, but I would tell you we don't have a high rate of recidivism. Probably 4 years ago, I would have said stay with the policy.
Yeah.
However, I would also kind of counter with our sample size is so low, generally speaking, thankfully, that you probably aren't exposed to a lot.
Well, then the question is it low because our kids don't dabble, or is it low because we have a 45 days?
Right.
And that's kind of like the chicken versus the egg syndrome for me. And that's where I'm struggling. I can't speak, and I won't mention names, but other school districts, the recidivism rate's there with certain kids. The 10-day first offense is interesting, but what happens to the kid that had 2 fights during the school year, had 2 days off already? Now we get to a THC, now we're into the 12th and 13th day of suspension. So this is only one issue we're talking about. We're talking about drug offense, or this offense. What if in their jacket during the school year, they've already been suspended 5 days? Because 10 days is that threshold. So then it's still going to come to the board because we've crossed that.
No, I don't think so.
No, that's consecutive days.
Consecutive days.
And you don't tie the incidents together, we're separate.
So the kid can be suspended 10, and then 3, then 3.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a little bit different with special needs students.
Yeah, absolutely.
IEP is different.
Yeah, I just, you know, I think this is something that it sounds like the board's got an appetite for. I just want to be careful that, you know, 10 days, I get caught with this, it's 2 weeks off. Mom and dad will be mad, but not that mad. 45 days, I'm going to get, mom and dad will be real mad. I don't want a vacation, you know, and one of the things that we can all sit here and say, I think with Don's work and his team, we have a safe school district. When you go backwards, it opens up Pandora's box a little bit. But I do think, based on these hearings that we've been on, this tiered system is something that we should look at. And I respect where you're coming from this. So I can get around this. I just want to be careful. And you know, whether it's on the administrators or our school security, that, you know, we're checking bathrooms, that kids are, you know, in front of these changes, and we get it out to the parents. And, you know, force it into when they sign up and act, that here's the new policies that you're going to look at. And the parents are on board with it too, because, yeah, the kid's showing up and saying it's dad's. Well, then dad needs to know what the policy is before the kid leaves the house. Because that's the relationship that we have to really bang home in terms of this. But, you know, I want to hear more. If we roll this out, this is where the direction is going, please coordinate with the board and tell me this is working or it's not working. We need to tweak it. Because the last thing I want to do is pigeonhole it, and you guys are doing triple paperwork because now 10 days is not really 45 days. Mr.
I just want to emphasize what's already been established is that, you know, I was part of one of those hearings with you, and when you are removing a child for 45 days, if they're a seventh grader or if they're a ninth grader, your relationship with that parent is done. And so having this opportunity to look at the 10-day, you are now able to, you are working with that parent. Listen, we are going to support you. Here's what we're going to put in place for you and when your child comes back. And I would say to you, if a child is on that path, they're going to be on that path and they'll eventually find themselves removed because it's unfortunate they're not able to get the help or make the change they need to make. And ultimately, we're looking for kids to make changes in behavior. And I think, and for us to be able to maintain a relationship with that child is going to be better served for that child for the next 4 years or 3.5 years or the 2 years he's with the middle school.
Well, and to your point, because I think you're talking, we're not going to mention names and we can't mention the specifics, but Mr. Tate, Mrs. McKee and I, who sat for hours, it was a long night that night. You know, the question I kept saying to my colleagues was, what's the kid's grades like? What are the parents like? Give me, you know, this is going to damage this kid for years to come. And that concerns me on everything. Having a tiered system, at least to your point, brings hopefully the team, the principals, the counselors, you know, anybody, the parents, all to the table to fix this. Because I don't want a kid lost. I don't want you to educate these kids. It's a big deal. But the 45 days also is a hammer too. So yeah, I think I'm willing to go with this, without a doubt, because those long hearings are something else.
Yeah.
But I just want to be careful that we just didn't invite larger numbers because now we're like everybody else.
I'm going to interject for a minute. We can talk about this all night. It looks like there's willingness to. I'm seeing a lot of nods. So is there anyone not sold before we continue to talk?
I can always leave the caveat until, when
Are
is
you
this?
not sold?
You're asking me a question. When is this,
It
is
would
this
be
also
for the
something
fall.
that will change for the fall? So we have time to continue to talk about this. This is a good first discussion. I'm not committing to anything tonight.
Are you talking about being sold over the whole policy or just the specific thing we're talking about?
This is the policy.
So I want to start thinking about more of a tiered approach because now we go from 10 to a full year. Because if there's a second offense, it's a full year, right? And what if, so in your investigation, after the first offense, you find out that this child is trouble, there's a lot going on there, right? And this child needs help. And, the school gives that help to a certain point. And then, 3 months later, the child makes the same or similar mistake. And you know that there's a lot going on there, right? So then that child needs a lot of help. Is it fair to say, now you take a whole year off, we don't care what is happening to you in your family, in your life, it's somebody else's problem. Or the administration has the flexibility to take a case like that and think about, what, there's a lot going on, maybe the best way to help and educate a child is to maybe go to a different tier, not a full year. Maybe we look at it in a different way. Does the administration have that flexibility?
I would argue that as soon as you go in that realm, what you do for one, you do for all of them. You can't make judgments because we are not the United States judicial system. We don't have sentencing guidelines. We don't have, so if we say you do A, consequence is B, that's what it is, and it has to be. And if A has shades of gray around it, it's still B because we're going to get sued because, wait, I'm going to talk for a minute.
I'm not interrupting you, Mike. I just raised my hand.
We're going to get sued because we haven't done uniform policy. We don't write sentencing guidelines.
So can we talk to the attorneys then and see if they have any advice on that front? Because I have a hard time going from 10 days to a full year, no matter what the second offense is.
I don't, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, to point that Ms. Pally made, I think that there's a lot of validity there, and yes, you can consult with our legal counsel, any board member can. I think, we could spend a lot of time doing tiers. One of the things that struck me when I did a hearing, and I don't want to talk about specifics, I don't think we should, but is the idea that we have the same penalties for high school and middle school, and God forbid, someday at elementary school. So we could put in a tiered system that addresses age levels. I would prefer to stay away from that kind of complexity. I think it could be awfully time consuming. The other thing that I learned in doing a hearing was the more discretion you build into the system, the more likely it is that parents are going to hire attorneys. And, we're talking about one of the benefits potentially of moving to 10-day for first offense is reducing the number of school board hearings, which is not just a matter of time, it's a matter of expense and time for administrators and so forth and so on. If we put in a tiered system, we're opening the door to hearing after hearing after hearing, which is just awfully time consuming and expensive for us all. And the last thing I wanted to point out was I want to remind everybody, I think you all know this, but I think it's important to remember, as I think Mr. Funk said at the outset, these cases are immediately, without exception, I think, referred to the school resource officer, the police officer who sits, or walks, I should say, in north and in south. So law enforcement is,
They can be charged.
yeah, they can be charged. So we don't have to get into the law enforcement aspect. We don't have to worry about, narcotic versus alcohol versus pot versus, the township police are consulted in every case like that, which is an important thing to keep in mind.
Mr. Roosevelt, you had another question?
I believe Mr. Hidalgo asked it. What I was gonna ask was, how many kids do we currently have? When does this take into place? And what happens with those that are in the bridge of the gap? But I think the answer was this is gonna take effect next fall.
Yes.
So we probably won't have any bridge gaps, so. Yeah.
We had addressed that with the first policy as well, so that
This is just a question. Going back to the days when I chaired policy, in the old days, we always did first read and second read for policies.
Yeah.
We've moved away because we found a lot of policies don't require first read and second read. This one.
Well, we have a lot of time yet.
Yeah, but I'm
so
just.
we'll go back to the solicitor with some of these comments. And we'll do it again probably in July.
Yeah.
Or June.
I would say early
Okay.
next year. Because there's more to be done on this, to be honest with you.
Next
Can I
year?
say, meaning January, February,
Can't
March?
do it, no.
Whereas you're saying July, that would be the
Can't be
middle
for
next year.
school year.
I'm just saying, we're gonna have more discussions on this.
Well, you might.
Okay, that's fine, I'll have my own discussions, I'm good at that, right?
Yeah.
So, question, just to clarify, you said that the incident rates didn't change between our 45-day, when you looked at the other school districts, they were relatively the same when you did that's the answer to what you were asking about, if it was a deterrent or not. Then also, you had just said something about, but I'll pass on that one. So, but I do believe, you said that without exception, you're going to refer it to this police, but that's not true when it comes to over-the-counter. You're not going to refer the police, the over-the-counter.
Mr. Funk's shaking his head yes.
No, we go for over-the-counter.
Please.
Okay.
So he's not shaking his head for that. So Advil, so I do believe, over-the-counter versus that. Now we're talking 10 days, but still, there could be a distinction made there. If there's a reason not to make the distinction or why it's blended together, then I'd be curious to know. And then also,
I think there already is a distinction, like Advil and aspirin. That's governed by our medication policy. That's not under our control policy.
it says non-prescription over-the-counter medication.
I think that's more like the Adderall or the prescription
No, Adderall's prescription. So it says over the counter. So I just think we should look at that, make it
Yeah,
clear.
that bothers me too.
So that's just one thing that we can add.
There's a reason we
Right.
don't let kids have over-the-counter drugs in school. There's a reason, it's health
I'm
and
talking
safety.
about the penalty part, not about whether they are not still punished. I'm sure there could be a lesser a 3-day suspension. All I'm saying is, it used to be 45 days for bringing in the drug. So there's a lot of work. As I said, me personally, I think this is a couple reads before we get it where we'd like it, because it's very important to get it right. This is something that's happening all the time. And I'd also,
Joe, what do you
keep
want?
interrupting me, sir.
What do you want? You want a couple of reads, what do you want?
I've just said.
I need you to write them down and
Are
send
you
them to us.
okay, dude?
No,
Because
I'm
you're
just-
very adversarial tonight.
I
Can you
am.
please stop?
I'm
gonna ask
hearing
you
a
to
lot of
calm
talk,
down.
but I need you to tell me what you want.
You're interrupting me, and I'd rather you just calm down, because we have until
Okay, keep
July to
going.
figure this out. Thank you. So, if you will let me finish my train of thought, that would be really helpful. So, also, like, you think of something like fentanyl, that's gonna be the same thing? Crazy. It's a poison, you know? So, there's a lot of questions I have, and I think everybody has it. It's good stuff. We don't have to ram this through, looking at a bunch of nods and saying, let's ram this through. I mean, we have until July. And we're gonna have policy meetings. This is the first one we've had. I think we wanted this meeting maybe last summer, and it took you till now to have this policy?
It took the administration until now to put this together.
Well, we don't need the administration to have a policy and talk about it, Mike. And now all of a sudden, you're all over everybody trying to get this thing done tonight. Now, I'm gonna stop acting like this is the high school, like freaking, you know, bully thing going on here, but you need to relax.
Ms. Pally.
Yes, so I do have a couple of things I would like to see, and I agree that we definitely have to talk about this again. I would love to find out what we are proposing compares with other school districts in our area. I think you already looked into that, maybe we can look into that more. So it would be good to have similar policies, so when you are at an MBIT or somewhere else, we don't have these discrepancies. And also will give us an idea of what we have around us. And also I would like to speak with the solicitor and see, I have questions, or maybe we can have a session with the solicitor present and we can ask our questions. And it's very important policy, it's gonna affect a lot of families. I always say, what if is my child is the next day? You know, because, I mean, we can talk about it in general. How would you feel if it was your child that got in trouble? Do you want them to be out for 45 days and then for a full year? Do you want to give them more? I mean, how can you help the child more than anything else? That's so I'm very glad we have this discussion tonight. It's extremely useful for me because we had never had this discussion before. And it was very painful to go through the hearings. I've been through one and I'll never forget it. It was horrible.
So could I, just from a process, I didn't mean to interrupt. From a process standpoint, the way we've done this before with policies, if any of you have any concerns, like you just stated, if you could email them to Dr. Thornton and myself, I'll get them to Mr. Funk. We'll sit down, we'll make the modifications that are requested, review them with the solicitor.
Get some answers for you, yeah.
Get some answers, get them out to you. And then we'll also discuss potentially at the next policy committee meeting, if there's enough interest, we could bring the solicitor to the meeting. We try to avoid that because it costs money, but we can certainly do that if there's enough interest. We have done that in the past.
Good point.
Yeah, because I'm gonna have to go back and tell Aaron I called it exec session without her too, so, let's have the solicitor at the next meeting. You know, because a lot of the stuff I think we're gonna hear, I was just talking to Mr. Tate, because he did the last policy round. Most of the stuff is covered by state law. The language, what you're gonna find, Ms. Pally, is the language is the language in every policy, because DSBA wrote it. for all of them. It is just the law, and it reflects that. So the only thing different is the number of days.
It's the law, but it's a I think it's pretty much recommendation. If it's a law, we shouldn't be talking about it because it's a law. So what I think is they have a lot of recommendations. What I'm saying is we don't have to vote on a law. He's saying that there's already laws out there. But
Actually,
we have to
the law
adopt.
says we have to have these
We
policies.
have, right, but I'm saying, you're talking about the recommendations that PSBA have, are recommendations. We can tweak them to suit our district because we're the governing body. So,
However, to
Sure.
go further on that, PSBA has used all their lawyers and legal teams to make sure these are legally viable in the state of Pennsylvania.
sure, but again, we also have unique circumstances. They're representing the entire state, so things are different based on locality. Kind of like what we just got out of with the pandemic. It was locally determined what each school district did. So my point is, if we just do what PSBA is, then we could just say, whatever PSBA does, let's just follow, Matt, just do that, and we're done. We don't even have to have any discussions. But we're having discussions because we can tweak things. So I'll tell you, I don't need the email. I can tell you if there's something wrong with, if there's something we can do about prescription versus non-prescription, or understanding why. It's great to do these things back and forth, but this is what we're here to talk publicly and to deliberate in public and to say, oh, come back and email. Well, then just make sure all the emails get posted on the website.
They typically are.
Our emails will be posted to the website.
The questions are summarized.
Oh, good. So there'll be a disclosure. So, as I said, I think this process is what we're supposed to do. This is what we're here elected to do. And we shouldn't make, be upset if it takes some time to work something out so important. That, again, I've been trying to get done for many years, but there's devils in the details. There's a lot of details here, so I appreciate everybody's input.
Mr. Frederickson, do you have everything you need?
I believe so. I have a lot of questions, but while we're with you, get those resolved.
Well, and we're going to get Aaron.
And I don't mind having, I was just going to say, I don't mind having Aaron on the phone as opposed to here
Sure.
if that's.
Yeah, either way. Either.
Did Aaron make these changes or Joanne?
So Joanne was more on 227, and Aaron was more on 218.1.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I think
Joanne,
it would,
I mean,
I think it would be Joanne, but we can.
227.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so.
Yes, I have what I need.
Okay, and then I'm soliciting questions or tweaks you'd like to see when we come back. I mean, if you want, we can put Mr. Tate asked about in there, and here's the answer. I don't care. But we can talk about it, or we can have specific action items. I'm looking for action items. So what do we want to do? So, and is it manageable? And the other thing is I need these folks down here to say, yeah, that's workable, or no, it's not. So, yeah.
Now, when would you want this, I mean, we're going to have this is first reading, second reading, whatever. When would you want this tightened up to the point that we can roll it out to the parents? And
So we were looking to implement next fall, beginning of the school year, which seems like a logical time to me. I think we would want to include it in our student handbooks. So we'll probably go to press with those March, April, May.
April.
Okay. So we need this hammered out by March to give you plenty of time,
April.
right?
Good.
Okay.
Great.
I said April, sorry.
So any questions, Mr. Frederickson and Dr. Philbin?
Send the questions or comments or desires, and then we'll discuss all those. But if you send them, then we have answers. That's the difference for tonight. We didn't have a solicitor. And frankly, to be fair to our solicitors, I don't think they had answers. They had to do research as well for a lot of this stuff.
We send them to you or to Matt?
Yes.
Both.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a public record.
Both would be
That makes a public record then too. right?
Send lawyers.
Any more comments?
Public comment?
Oh, that's next.
All right.
Any public comment?
No, just as a former educator, I have the utmost respect for what the principals are up against. You know, it's not easy. And I think, as you've all well stated, that it's all about the student. And I think what this gentleman stated, what his son went through for 45 days, you know, just think about what our kids went through in COVID. You know, in April of 2020, they were out of school for 2 months and at home, and the damage it did. So I do think losing instruction for that amount of time, as a former teacher myself, takes a toll on a student. If the overall goal is for the student's success, it's for the student to be in the classroom.
And you spoke, so I need your name and title. Sorry. Public record. It's being recorded. So. Thanks. No worries. But and then you gentlemen down there before we wrap up. Any more comments?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any more from the board? Meeting adjourned.
Yeah, thanks.
Eagle.